Amendment proposed, after clause 14, insert the new clause, the words as printed on the marshalled list.
My Lords, I would like to support Amendment 25 moved by the Noble Lord Viscount Colville, and I declare my interest as Executive Director of the Telegraph Media Group and draw attention to my other media interests in the Register. My Lords, as the Noble Lord has said, the issue of confidentiality of journalist sources has been a leitmotif both during the obsequies of the unloved Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and throughout the passage of this bill, both during extensive pre-legislative scrutiny in all its stages in the other place and now here in the committee of your Lordship's House. But we are now nearing the end of it all, and so this is probably our last opportunity to get it right. It's an issue that therefore deserves the closest and most thorough attention. I doubt there are many here who need persuading about the importance in a free society of the protection of sources. The arguments were most formidably summed up in the case of Goodwin versus the United Kingdom in a famous ruling in the European Court of Human Rights some 20 years ago, when he said, "Without protection, sources may be deterred from assisting the press in informing the public on matters of public interest. As a result, the vital watchdog role of the press may be undermined, and the ability of the press to provide accurate and reliable information may be adversely affected." The protection of sources is absolutely crucial for investigative reporting, whistleblowing, and indeed free and unfettered political debate. Without adequate protection, investigative journalism becomes almost impossible. Whistleblowers do not come forward to the press and wider media to alert them to issues of public interest, and political debate becomes sterile and bland. And your Lordship should not underestimate the difficulty already faced by journalists in getting confidential sources to speak on matters of often profound public interest. There has been so much attention in recent years to the way in which sources have been exposed through surveillance and the misuse of anti-terrorist legislation that it's becoming harder and harder to get sources to come forward. Some even fear for their lives because they could easily become targets themselves if it became known that they had cooperated with a reporter. So it is not an overstatement to say that, on occasion, protection of sources can be a matter of life and death. And that is why we must take with utmost seriousness the passage of any legislation in this House which damages free expression and undermines the protection afforded to confidential sources by opening up the possibility of the state being able to shadow the work of journalists, track what they are up to, identify their sources, and see what information they have made available. My Lords, I know the Government is acutely aware of the importance of this issue and has listened with great diligence to the concerns of the media and others. I'm very grateful to them for the action they have already taken to strengthen the bill in this regard, and amendments in the other place are a very welcome step in this direction. But unfortunately, I do not believe they have yet gone far enough. There are safeguards, yes, and they are very welcome, but they are not strong enough, and above all, they will not work properly, and that is what this amendment is all about. My Lords, as I've said, this is a matter of real and urgent concern to the whole of the media: publishers, editors, trade unions, national and regional press, magazines, broadcast and digital. And there's been unprecedented cooperation among interests which are often competing. And the reason for the level of this unity is, I am afraid, a profound sense of déjà vu. During the passage of RIPA back in 2000, a similar coalition of interests, led by the Newspaper Society, warned that its wide terms and lack of adequate safeguards would inevitably lead to the undermining of confidentiality of sources. The industry warned that the number of organisations who could use RIPA powers should be limited, and that the grounds for use of those powers should be more strictly limited. And the industry was repeatedly told that it was crying wolf and that there was no way the bill could be so abused. Jack Straw, then Home Secretary, in the other place on the 6th of March 2000, gave a specific guarantee on that subject. But of course, we know exactly what happened, and we've heard and seen of numerous examples of where local authorities and the police then subsequently used RIPA powers of surveillance to access phone records, to crack down on whistleblowers talking confidentially to the press. And it's often been the local press, who are the guardians of local democracy and accountability, who have been in the firing line. In one case, involving the Derby Telegraph, a local authority used RIPA powers to spy on a reporter who'd been talking to council employees. In another deeply disturbing incident, Thames Valley Police used RIPA powers to place a probe inside the car of a source who'd been talking to a reporter from the Milton Keynes Citizen, Sally Muir, and on the back of her recordings, obtained, the back of the recordings obtained, arrested the journalist and searched her. In 2012, Cleveland police used Ripper powers to access the phone records of 3 Northern Echo journalists to try to find out the source of the Echo's coverage of a Cleveland police internal report that revealed elements of institutional racism within the police force. All this, and much more we never know about, happened despite protestations from the then government that this could possibly not happen. The reason for that, as we've seen in countless other cases of legislation involving press freedom and confidentiality of sources, is because the legislation has not been watertight, proper and comprehensive safeguards were not written onto the face of the bill, and it has been too easy for those wanting to access sources to find loopholes through which to crawl. And this mistake cannot be allowed to happen again. And my lords, it's easy to see where the problem with this bill arises. As the noble lord said, yes, there are safeguards in clause 73 of the bill relating to prior judicial authorisation. That is welcome, but it is inadequate in a number of respects. For one thing, it only governs acquisition of communications data for the purposes of identifying or confirming the identity of a journalistic source. Crucially, it does not apply to acquisition of data for other purposes. But most importantly, it does not allow for prior notification of the media of an application to use the bill's powers and the opportunity for the media to make submissions on whether this will impact on the confidentiality of a source. It is all very well having judicial safeguards in place, but they won't work unless the Judicial Commissioner assessing the application has all the relevant information before applying his or her judgment and making an informed decision. After all, how could a Judicial Commissioner possibly know what they do not know? That is almost Kafka-esque. Without input from the media, and I recognise there must be exceptions to this where a journalist or media organisation is under suspicion, they could not possibly, for instance, know how the use of surveillance could actually place the life of a source or indeed a journalist in danger and other such considerations. In those circumstances, the tests, very important tests outlined in the bill, cannot properly be applied, and the safeguards as a result simply won't work. This amendment moved by the noble Viscount seals up that significant loophole in a way which will allow the safeguards the government has rightly put forward to work properly. It is absolutely not an attempt to put journalists and media organisations outside the scope of the law. It merely recognises, as other legislation ever since the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 has done, the vital importance of this issue in a free society and imports into the bill tried and tested statutory safeguards using well-established and effective legal and procedural methods. My lords, this amendment seems to me to be a straightforward, simple and common sense way of dealing with a complex issue in a bill which we all recognise is vital for the security of our nation. I suspect the government is not quite there yet, and I hope it is, as they say, still on a journey and may yet see the light on the road to Damascus. And the government will, I know, put up a number of arguments against it. They will say that the safeguards are adequate. But the point I've just made is that while they're fine on paper, they will not work in practice, and there is a danger we will have Ripper all over again. Unlike Independence Day, it's a sequel we could well do without. The government will say, I suspect, that the number of cases is likely to be incredibly small, perhaps only a dozen or so a year. But I say that one case is bad enough. But more importantly is the signal that it sends to confidential sources that journalists cannot 100% guarantee their security, and that chills free expression and undermines democracy at national or local level. And the government, I suspect, may say that if they introduce additional safeguards for journalism, they will have to do so for others. But I would say that free speech and protection of sources is a genuinely special case, which this House has always set on a pedestal. My lords, I would argue that there can be no good argument of principle against this amendment, which is not just an esoteric matter, but a very real and pressing issue. That's why it's got the united backing of the media. That's why all the parliamentary inquiries into this bill have said that it must be tackled, and that is why, as this amendment shows, it has the backing of members from many different parts of the House. My lords, in conclusion, the Conservative Manifesto in 2015, a great document, itself recognised the importance of this issue. It was perhaps the first time a party had ever made a specific commitment to protect journalists and confidential sources, and I take great pride in that. But it's time now to make good on that commitment, and I do hope my noble friend, who has always been the soul of kindness and understanding in listening to concerns put to him, will accept this amendment, or indeed bring forward proposals for report stage which will deal with this issue and protect free speech. As I said earlier, this is the time to get this right, and that time is running out.
I'd like to support